All right, we're gonna get going, get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Matana. I'm one of the co-founders of Vital. We are starting our first session of Gen Z School for Marketers. What we're gonna do today is Natalie, say hi, Natalie, you're on mute. Natalie is the other co-founder of Vital. She will be moderating this fabulous panel of Gen Zers and imparting all kinds of wisdom to all of our viewers here. I'm going to introduce the panel. First is Rose. Rose is Vital's editor-in-chief for our blog called Vital Voyeur. If you haven't signed up already, please do so on our website. Rose is also a career talent and acquisitions, has experience in that world on the corporate side, and she's also has a specialty in DE&I. Our next panelist is T. You want to wave?
Hello.
T. Hi. T is an avid gamer. He's an ambitious creator and a community organizer. And then last but not least, we have Gerardo.
Hi.
Hi, Gerardo. Gerardo wins on the best background for today's panel. Gerardo is an actor and martial arts enthusiast and a dancer. So
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, one more housekeeping thing for all of the viewers, attendees. Please, if you take your mouse to the bottom, you can open up the Q&A section, and then anything that you want to ask our panelists or any thoughts or comments you have along the way, please go ahead and type it in the Q&A and we will get to it. So Natalie, you want to take it away?
Yes. And just another note on Q&A, feel free to type your questions, even if they're during the webinar themselves. We'll have a section at the close for Q&A, and we'll file through all the questions that we've had. So if someone's speaking, you want to ask a panelist a follow-up, you want to understand something more about one of the brand equity dimensions we're discussing, please type that in the Q&A. Don't forget it, and we will get to that at the close of the webinar. All right, so Matana, if you can share your screen with the deck. Beautiful. So we can go ahead and jump to the agenda page to give everyone a breakdown of what we'll be discussing today. So we went through our introduction. Thank you, Matana, for that. And what we're really going to be focusing on today for brand equity are the 5 consumer dimensions that really represent brand equity and successful brand equity and brand love among consumers, and how those relate to Gen Z as a demographic. What are the key components of each of those dimensions for Gen Z that we've seen in research, that we've discussed with the panelists, and also giving a little narrative story around brands that reflect that dimension as a little bit easier way to educate. And then we're going to ask the panelists some questions on each dimension to further explore their perspectives. We'll have a key takeaways moment where we'll share a recap of everything we discussed, and then a Q&A session where we'll go through all of the Q&As and the questions that are fed to us in the Q&A box. Okay, so our first dimension is understanding, and Rock T, who we have here in his wonderful kitchen, which is larger than Joe's first New York City apartment, says he can't name too many brands that understand Gen Z, but Opera GX is a brand that he really feels does. So when we're looking at dimension, something we really want to focus on for understanding is it's really about what makes Gen Z and that generation tick. And it's not just understanding their values. There's a lot of research and information in the media around what does Gen Z value, but it's also beyond things like sustainability and inclusivity. It's really about the why behind those values. What is the reason for those values to be so important to Gen Z, and what's that emotional connection behind them? That's really how we get to understanding. And Spotify has become a cornerstone for Gen Z listeners, And Martin, I don't know if you're aware, we cannot see the deck anymore. So Gen Z has become a cornerstone for Gen Z listeners. And it's not just about their expansive music collection. It's really how they align their brand with the zeitgeist of Gen Z, and how that's expressed are three key elements. So value alignment, aligning their values with Gen Z, need satisfaction, so meeting those needs that Gen Z has, and cultural relevance. And they do this through cultural events and movements. For instance, Discover Weekly and Wrapped, using a lot of that data to really communicate that personalization and connection of what Gen Z is representing and saying that they need data-wise, and cultural relevance. So staying on the culture, having a thread to the culture, trending topics, artists, cultural events. And all of this is culminated in their latest earnings from Q2. Gen Z helps Spotify's total active users soar to 551 million. So a lot of that growth, they contribute to Gen Z as a demographic. So we can jump to the next slide. And I want to ask a quick question to all of the panelists. How often do you believe brands genuinely comprehend your needs as a Gen Z consumer? Is it always, is it sometimes, rarely, or never? T, I might have an assumption about what your answer is, but we'll start with you. Always, sometimes, rarely, never.
For me, it's a sometimes, and for that, it's hit or miss. I mean, I feel like when it comes to understanding Gen Z's needs, you can tell who has people that represent us in the room versus when they don't. So a lot of the times it feels like they are observing culture and not participating in it. And it shows.
Thanks, T. Gerardo, you're next. What about you? Always, sometimes, rarely, never.
I agree with Teague's absolutely everything that they just said. And honestly, I never trust big brands anyway. So yeah, that's probably my answer.
So I'm going to come back to that. I want to hear more about that.
Yes.
Rose, what about you? You're on
I was
mute.
on mute. Sorry. I think I'm somewhere in between sometimes and rarely. Going off of what Gerardo said as well. I think with these smaller brands, they a lot of times will get it a little bit more. And the brands that I feel like really get it oftentimes are those with Gen Z founders, some that are just, you know, coming to mind, both in the like menstrual and health space are August and Viv by V. And they have their Gen Z founders really front and center. And it's clear, you know, to T's point, that they have Gen Zers in the room. And I think that's why they understand our needs.
So my follow-up question then, and I'll have you start with this, Rose. What are Gen Z values? And why are those Gen Z values? What is that really emotional reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, equity and inclusion has to be kind of a pillar, and that moves into a lot of different spaces, right? Inclusivity, justice, all kinds of work. And why that is, I would say, like, if you think about the time that we grew up in, right? If you think about the first time we got to vote in an election, a lot of us, we can understand what's happening in the socio-political sphere that led us to be more progressive. We're also like factually just the most diverse generation yet, right? And as generations continue, they will get more and more diverse, right? We have the most amount of like LGBTQIA plus folks in our generation. So that's a really, I think, a cornerstone for me that I see in Gen Z.
Thank you. And Gerardo, I want to come back to you as well about that you don't trust big brands, because in the practice that we did for the webinar, something that came up was the size of the brand changes how Gen Z perceives and the expectation of it. So there's kind of maybe a pessimism or just a reality check of large brands. Like, okay, they're doing as good as they can for their size, but really where we feel we are mostly connected and seen is smaller brands. And so Gerardo, can you speak to why big brands elicit distrust in you? And what does a brand do that really feels like they understand you and it creates that trust?
Yeah, of course. I would say I don't trust big brands because their intentions are to sell. Their intentions aren't, that's always going to be their intention, is just to sell. And how can I sell the most out of this one thing or whatever it is? And I don't know about everybody else, but me and like my friends, we'd like to be more, or correction, whatever we can control in terms of like buying and whatever. If we can buy from somewhere else that has more local, it's like a local mom and pop shop. It's you know, a smaller business, then we'll go that direction. If it's something we can't control, then you know, just whatever. But that distrust with big companies is going to come from how Teagues was saying earlier. They often try to hop onto things, and they don't have people that are part of those cultures in the room, and then you can tell it's very obvious. And so they do this always, and they're going to keep doing it. So whenever something that they see as trendy comes up, they're going to hop on, and they're just going to try to be a part of it. And that's, I don't know, I just don't like that. It's very disingenuous. Yeah.
So it really sounds like a big piece of that understanding is needing to have the generation reflected within the company processes. You want a Gen Zer writing copy. You want a Gen Zer making decisions about products for the brand if they are targeting Gen Z. You want that opinion in the room. You want them to ask Gen Z what they want. How do you feel? All of that, those elements that create that trust and understanding. You want to feel like there's Gen Z on the other side.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely Gen Z, but also just in general, people of color, queer people, everybody who doesn't see themselves as often, and you know, might not, and these big corporations, because you know they're gonna do what they're gonna do, and that's what, you know, I get it. But if you want to get like my vote on this, then you should have those people in the room and more people in the room. You know what I mean? Like that's just, but that's just me.
Yeah, it comes up to me, this article I read, because the example that we're using for this particular dimension is Spotify. And one of the really popular elements of Spotify is Spotify Wrapped. And I read an article saying that an intern, a Gen Z intern, was responsible for the concept of Spotify Wrapped. And so that goes to your point of saying, you know, when it is the generation themselves that are creating ideas and products and bringing that element to the front, that shows. And that was just authentically something that really took off and was a really great idea because it came from inside the generation, inside the culture.
Yeah, because you can't correct something if you're not using it, and you don't know what problems are with it if you're not actively using it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gerardo. And T, I'm going to bring up something really quickly as well, which is you gave a really good example about, was it a Netflix show, and how they use the wrong terminology for clapback versus snapback. Can you share a little bit about that and talk about how a brand can avoid that?
It was kind of like a, so Netflix has been the topic many times for not including more inclusivity in the writers' rooms. And it shows when they try to use like AAVE and slang that's been popularized by Black people and Gen Z with their Wednesday tweet. They said Wednesday is the queen of a snapback. And they meant clapback, which is a quick response to someone insulting you and being on your feet. A snapback isn't that. It's the period after a woman's pregnancy where, you know, so it was kind of like it showed that they didn't have a good understanding on what they were saying.
And how do you feel, what can a brand learn from that? What can a brand do to really do the opposite of that and create that seamless trust and understanding with their audience?
I feel like sometimes there is a thin line between understanding and pandering, and they usually like fall on the side of pandering. And I think to prevent that, you have to have people in your room who understand the culture. You're not going to have a room full of millennials and Gen X's writing and marketing towards Gen Z when they're not part of that culture.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to dimension 2. So dimension 2 in this brand equity matrix is connection. And something that Gerardo mentioned is that there's a clothing brand, Olivardo, that focuses on artisanal traditional techniques that are unisex and slow fashion. And it includes people of all genders and complexions wearing clothes. And that's how they knew that that was a brand that encompassed so many of their identities into one harmoniously, and that it meant everything to them. And so we're gonna get to more of Gerardo's perspective on Olivardo. But before we do that, the brand that we have that has had a lot of success with Gen Z on this particular dimension is Nike. Nike is considered as one of the most authentic brands according to Gen Z studies. And some of the 3 key elements that we find really important when creating a connection with Gen Z is emotional resonance, which they do really well with the Dream Crazy campaign that resonated with what everyone's been saying, that passion for equity and inclusion, brand affinity, so Nike Training Club, having that social community environment, and shared experiences. Breaking 2 is a collective moment for consumers to rally around. It's a race with people trying to break a 2-hour marathon. And so connection is not transactional, but a real emotional bridge where brands and their audience meet through shared experiences and emotive storytelling. And it's really about feelings. How does Gen Z feel about your brand? It's not just about liking your products. As Gerardo said, there's many elements that go into it. If they really need a product, yeah, maybe they'll buy your product, but they might not love it and they might not love the brand. So really, this generation wants to feel something more. And a brand's ability to create collective experiences and moments are really what defines brand love with this generation. So Gerardo, when speaking about Olivardo and that emotional bond with a brand, what are the things that you feel really create that emotional connection with you and a brand?
Yeah, the brand Olivardo, they're specifically from Oaxaca, Mexico, and the 2 people they got to give, like, it's like 2 people who did it, that hence the name Olivardo. They like joined their names together, and they're queer, they're Mexican, they're literally just me, and they're making clothes and they love fashion and they're doing it for people of all genders. And like it's beautiful clothing that has traditional embroidery on it. That all to me, they're just that already meant everything to me. And then the fact that they actually deliver on that consistently, and that just made it even more beautiful. Honestly, I didn't even focus on their marketing aspect. The second I read it, the second I saw it, I was like, this is what I want. This is my style, and that is it. And then I saw their marketing too, and I was like, okay, great. They're literally just doing what they said they would. So yeah.
Thank you. And T, something that you mentioned as well was that brands participating in shared moments in communities is always fun. It makes the brand memorable, and that's a really big piece of forging connection. So can you talk a little bit about how you think brands should approach community building? What brands you think are doing that really well? What does connection mean to you as a Gen Zer in your relationship with brands?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting seeing, you can gauge kind of how old someone is behind like a brand's like social media account, the way they interact with fans of like certain communities. So I think in their prime, Slim Jim, I'm an avid gamer, like, and one of the most popular games among Gen Z is Fortnite. Slim Jim, the brand was under like every single post of Fortnite, like replying to fans, excited about new updates and what's coming out. And it was like, it's really funny seeing them so updated with like meme culture and like also popular culture with Gen Z. And I think Duolingo does the same thing really well. They're the most popular ongoing manga right now is Jujutsu Kaisen, and they were making posts in reference to the manga, and it's really cool. It's really nice seeing that.
And what is it in particular? Like you're saying, you can judge the age, right, of someone
Yeah.
behind a brand social media, and that level of connection can be strengthened or weakened, kind of based on the authenticity of that. So, what do you recommend brands do? What can they learn from examples like Duolingo and like Slim Jim when creating connection with their audience?
I think when it comes to marketing, you really just got to find someone who's part of the community. Like Gen Z, you got to find someone who's really funny and consistent with all their like personality, and just trust them to make great content, like for your brand.
Awesome. And Rose, um, something that we mentioned a little bit in Dimension One, I want to bring up a bit more, is this kind of sizing consideration and how that impacts connection. And, you know, larger brands have more filters and maybe hurdles to having a more laissez-faire, free kind of experience, communication, et cetera, with their audience. Maybe there's more layers also that things need to run through. And so can you speak about the difference in brand size in terms of connection, and what do you think a large brand could do to kind of adopt and mimic some of the success that smaller niche brands have with Gen Z?
Totally. Yeah, I think most of the brands that I feel like have the best connections with their consumers are these smaller brands. Viv by V, I'll talk about a little bit more. They have on their Instagram a close friend story that you can, you know, kind of opt into. They'll add you to it, and then they go like kind of behind the scenes. They'll talk about, they'll take you to their like manufacturer where they go to ship things out. And it's this like really like personal connection, and really smart, because as we all know, when you like see you're part of someone's close friend story, you're like, ooh, they added me to their close friends, and now this is a brand that's like taking that on. So I think that's a really cool example. I'm not sure how like scalable that exact example is. Obviously, once you have maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, I think it could be more difficult. But all that said, as brands grow, I think they need to continue trusting their team, right? I used to work for a very like trendy CPG brand that, you know, was very social and digital forward. And then after they were acquired, I remember talking to my friends on their marketing team about how it could take like weeks for legal to approve some kind of copy, right? And that's just it's just too long, right? So we need to kind of remove some of that red tape where we can, so that your team, your trusted team, can have genuine interactions on social media, you know, maybe via customer service on all of these channels. Because if you are waiting 2 weeks to see if legal says you can answer this to, you know, a comment on your post, you're gonna miss the moment. So I think there has to be some like removing of that kind of tape. And also like trust in your employees if they've, you know, haven't done anything to diminish that trust.
Thank you. That brings up something that we shared in the practice around risk, and this idea that, you know, there is higher reward with a certain amount of risk, and small brands seem to have a bit more appetite for risk. And so, you know, how can larger brands adopt that same risk appetite or mindset, understanding that these risks aren't as high as they might appear internally? And so it's really understanding that brand identity, really knowing who you are, and being confident in communicating that, and being confident in bestowing that to your team and allowing them to communicate that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think knowing that someone's going to be mad about your language, whatever it is, right? If you're being super inclusive with your language, let's take a period brand, and you're saying, you're using the word like people or menstruators rather than women, there's a whole host of people who are going to be mad at that, even though you're just being inclusive and correct, right? Because we know like not all women get their periods. Not everyone who gets their period is a woman. Like that's a fact, but there are going to be people who are mad at you for that. So I think there's also a little bit of like having your voice and sticking to it, even when certain consumers aren't happy. Because if you try to please everyone, I think that's when you lose a lot of Gen Z, because it's like, oh, you're not even standing behind your values. So it can be a bummer.
Thank you. That's a really good reflection. The idea that Gen Z wants brands that stand for something. And when you're standing for something, you're not necessarily going to appease everyone. And Gen Z is totally okay with that.
Totally.
Okay, so I'm moving on to dimension 3, image. And Rose, we have your quote up here that you like when founders and teams are front and center, like with August and Viv by V. And a brand that we have that really is doing incredibly well with Gen Z is Apple, to reflect crafting an image and how well they do this. And so well that 87% of Gen Z report owning an iPhone, and 88% expect their next phone to be an iPhone, 34% own an Apple Watch. And when I was kind of researching numbers for this, I was like, doesn't 88% of everyone have an iPhone? And I learned the answer is no. Among older generations, it's about 50-50, 50 iPhone, 50 Android. And with Gen Z in particular, it's very close to 90. And so that is a massive increase. And so there really is something that Apple has done incredibly well to connect with the generation, which is also interesting because in preparation for this webinar, one of the things we had as part of Apple's kind of strength was some of their social responsibility. It's really communicated very strongly in the media. I know T, you spoke a little bit about this and some of the prep work. But overall, we ended up kind of focusing more on the social cachet and the strength of the Apple ecosystem, because what we all learned in the prep work and doing a bit more digging is really there is an element of the ecosystem and that blue bubble, right, that is incredibly strong among the generation, for why that number is 90%. Even people speak about not wanting to be in a group chat and having that someone in the group chat be the one with the green bubble and making it now a text chat instead of an iMessage chat, and how much that is frustrating for Gen Z. And that's frustrating enough that they don't want to be the person to do that. And so the 3 core elements when we're speaking about image, and image is really deeper than logos and aesthetics. Obviously, Apple does aesthetics incredibly well, but it's really about a brand's values. It's about their social perception, which is really key. And that's what we're going to speak about as well. Not just about looking good visually, but also beyond sleek designs. There's commitment to user privacy and sustainability, but really this Apple ecosystem and that dominance of the blue bubble they've managed to craft is an image that Gen Z has aligned itself with. And so I would like to speak a little bit about that. Their authenticity with the trend-setting design, inclusion of cultural icons and campaigns reflecting that Gen Z zeitgeist. And Rose, this is something you spoke about, that you really feel they've done their marketing very well in terms of their image of inclusion and equity among Gen Z values. That social cachet element of the strength of the blue bubble and how green text has become so negative and not desirable among Gen Z, and just innovation as well. There was a comment around the ability of tech integration and really tech forward nature. The fact that everything is so, everyone in your friend can have an iMessage chat, that all of your devices are connected. That really creates this super strong pull. And a quote we have here is that the strength of the ecosystem creates a moat that is fairly impenetrable by competition. So I'd like, Rose, if you can just speak a little bit about that, because I know we felt, okay, sustainability and privacy, which is very strongly communicated in media, is not really a core importance to Gen Z. There was something else that was going on. There is that Apple ecosystem. There is that blue bubble. Can you speak about what you feel the strength of that image is when it isn't privacy, it isn't more of these value-based things, it's really kind of something else?
Yeah, I think like an Apple or a Netflix or a Spotify, I'm not using those. I'm a consumer of all of those brands. I'm not consuming them thinking that like this is making the world a better place, right? I don't trust Apple's manufacturing practices overseas. I think it would be better for me probably to get one of these other kinds of phones. But they've made their value kind of just more important than those other pieces, or their value to me as a consumer. As simple as the fact that my text can pop up on my laptop, that's huge. The sleek design of iPhones, I think, and MacBook Airs, etc. I think that's really big and something that other technology companies haven't done quite as well. What else? Yeah, their marketing I think is pretty good. I see myself in their marketing, right? They, the picture you had up before, it's like this kind of younger person in all pink with pink hair. Like that's fun, right? Nothing wrong with that. So I think all of those things combined really make me that Apple consumer. But I don't buy Apple thinking that like I'm doing right by the world or by the environment.
Thank you for that. So I see some really good questions coming in the Q&A box. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through dimension 4, dimension 5, ask one question about one of the dimensions, and then jump to the Q&A so we can be sure to get to these questions that I do not want to miss. Okay, so I'm jumping to dimension 4, and that is action. And when we're thinking about action, it's really this incredibly important piece, especially I believe to Gen Z, where practices, sustainability, this equity and inclusion and internal processes that you've heard the panel speak about today form the pillars of a brand's identity. And this is really how Gen Z will gauge the authenticity, trust, and value that they're going to put behind your brand. So essentially where rubber meets the road. They don't want promises, they want proof, they want receipts. Are you going to do the things that you say you're going to do? And then I want to close with dimension 5, communication. And I think everyone thinks they understand what communication is, and social media is an example of that. But as we've heard today, a lot of brands do not actually get social media right. And where a lot of people utilize communication as maybe projecting or professing things in more of a one-way framing, communication is really a dialogue. And beyond being a dialogue, it is not just what you say, but also how you listen and how you incorporate the feedback from your consumer, how you create that two-way intention. And your communication should shift and evolve with your audience as much as they're shifting and evolving. So it is not a one-way aspect by any means. And so it's beyond dialogues. It's really about transparency, authentic engagement, feedback incorporation. And again, not really a lecture, it's really a conversation. And I think that the brands that really do incredibly well, to T's point, on social media are ones that understand it's a conversation and understand that it's a human conversation. And that's really the priority. And a brand that communicates incredibly well is Netflix. And communication is also beyond the fact that they run an incredible Twitter account, but also that they were the first media company to really provide incredibly transparent data around their viewership rates, and then utilize that as feedback and as communication and dialogue with their audience. And their communication goes as deep as the types of content that they're putting out, that kind of shows that they are communicating with their audience through the kind of content that they host. And that's really important as well. So I want to end the panel questions before we get to Q&A with a short question on how do you prefer brands communicate with you? And T, I'd love for you to take this because I know you have a lot of good examples of brand communication. And you also referenced a Opera GX example of a brand communication that you really loved.
Yeah, I think it showed my quote earlier in the beginning of communication, but There was an instance where somebody was mad over a video game because it added the option to use pronouns as you, because it's a dialogue based game where you're being spoken to. What are your pronouns? That's simple. And Opera GX responded to them being upset because Opera GX is a browser for gamers. They responded with a simple meme that said, everyone has pronouns. It came free with your speaking a language. And it was funny and it was simple, but it made me feel good because it was simple. And I feel like they're really in touch with how we feel in regards to values and in regards to communication with consumers. They have this persona, but they still let you know, like, hey, I'm just a brand. Like I'm not trying to trick you or like pander to you to make you think I'm something I'm not, and I find that respectable. I think more brands should do that.
Thank you, T. So I'm going to start the QA. And this is a question really relevant to the communication dimension. So I'm going to start with that. And an attendee asks, should the brand sit out if they can't communicate authentically and or quickly enough? Oftentimes their budgets, approvals, marketing organizations get in the way of really doing better. And Rose, I'd love for you to start with this question.
Yeah, I think on
Should brands sit
important-
out?
I think on important issues, if you can't speak knowledgeably or authentically, you should sit it out. I think a really good example we're seeing is that Selena Gomez and Rare Beauty, she came out with a recent basically take on what's happening in Gaza, and people weren't happy with it because she wasn't saying much. And in that case, I think it was like, hey, you should have sat this one out if you were going to put out some kind of statement that just didn't say anything at all. And I think that's a really interesting example because it's a celebrity brand, and now people are calling for a boycott on Rare Beauty. Excuse me. So I think that's a really interesting example where it was like, hey, if you're not going to add to the conversation, maybe just sit this one out. It would have been better for your bottom line.
That's a good example. And what about speed? So that's like referencing to the fact that maybe they don't have anything of value to add, right? They're just trying to, as T says, like be more observational in their communication and not really a part of it. And so what about speed? If a brand can't really reflect the trending topics, the trending communications in 2 hours, in 24 hours, and it takes them a week, what do you recommend for brands then?
I think it depends on the trend, right? Some trends have a few weeks, sometimes have a few months, right? Some of these trending sounds on TikTok, we've been seeing for months or even sometimes years. I don't think that's the typical. So I do think that you can get away with that sometimes. And someone, a marketing expert or someone who's really in those digital spaces are going to know, like, hey, I think this is going to stick around for a while. Let's work on this, even if it takes 2 weeks, and put it out. Similar to communication around like social issues and crises. Again, like what we're seeing happen right now has been in Israel and Palestine has been going on for a month. There are still people coming out and talking about it for the first time. And I think if that communication is comes from a place of like knowledge and empathy, I think it's still being celebrated, even though it's a month late and people might say, hey, where have you been the last few weeks? So I think it depends on the communication route, or rather the quickness. But I think a lot of times you can still kind of toss your hat in. Toss your ring in.
Toss your hat in the ring.
Toss your hat in. Toss your hat in the ring.
Yes.
Perfect. Toss your hat in the ring.
So I'm hearing T's voice echoing in my head around this idea of don't pretend to be something you're not. So if you're a brand that can't move quickly, that's fine. Use the successes that you have, use the power that you have. So if you can be relevant to the things that you can actually meet the timing for, then do that. If any of those things don't fit, don't hop on a trend after it's passed. Don't say something that you really shouldn't be saying or you're not a part of authentically. Thank you. I'm going to jump to the next question. Gerardo, I'd love you to take this. So Joe says, I'm curious, where is Gen Z getting their news and information? For instance, boomers had newspapers and local news. Gen X has 24-hour news channels and social media for generations below. How important are things like Snapchat or Twitch over what older generations are reading? Where do companies go to reach the Gen Z consumer? Now, I would also add, of course, TikTok is a big place for that. Gerardo, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I would definitely say TikTok is a huge thing because you're seeing news from a first-hand perspective. You're not seeing some, like, let's say a reporter showing you a video, you're just seeing the actual video that happened. So you don't really need to, like, in terms of validity, it's a lot simpler to say, hey, this is valid or this is true because you're actually seeing it from the person who witnessed it. You don't have to see it being reported on from a news source where they're going to give you their opinion, even if it's not intentional, they're still going to give you their opinion on it. This is just like, hey, here's the video, you see it for yourself.
So it's really, you want places where it doesn't feel it's funneled through necessarily a traditional media corporation. You really want on the ground, eye level, as brands would call it, kind of content. So you feel you can make your own more informed decision. T, what about you? Where do you get your news from? Because Joe specifically asked for your input as well.
Honestly, it's a mix of things. Base value, TikTok, because it's quick. When there's things going on, political or like social issues going on, you see people there in crowds with their phones out. Everyone has a camera on them in their pocket. So they're quick to show, like, here's what's going on. If you want to go into it deeper, I think Twitter is also a great place where people like talk about it and like push it out more. And I think growing up on the internet, one thing I've seen is older generations who have social media, but came with it like late stage. They're very susceptible to falling for misinformation. And I feel like growing up, we can tell immediately what's like, that's not real. Like, this is curated for a specific purpose and I'm not going to listen. But there are dedicated news channels on TikTok. There are people who's creating short form content for people who are on TikTok all day receiving information. There's one of my favorite ones is a gimmick, and it's like Bikini Bottom News, and it's the fish from SpongeBob talking about like the most current topics, and it's like super like it's super real, but it's also funny and amusing to look at.
Thank you. Okay, I'm moving on to the next question, and I'm also going to throw this to you, T. What is the magic sauce to successful influencer marketing? Gen Z seems to have a high BS detector. So how do our brands best gain their trust with influencers or attract them to be influencers for our brands? What's the magic sauce?
Finding those people. I mean, the way I feel is like if you stay ready, you gotta get ready. Like if you have people on your team who are knowledgeable about the culture and like what's going on TikTok and the influencers and how to reach them, because like most influencers are more likely to communicate with like fans and brands through like comments, like comment sections, comments and being like, oh, this was funny. Like I've seen there was this woman a couple of years ago who on TikTok was redesigning brands and she was like making goofy brand logos in like MS Paint, but it got the like attention of so many brands and they were able to contact her through her comments and they made her like fake funny logos, their logos for like a week or a month or something like that. So just like using social media more and using people who are part of the culture to reach out to the culture.
How can a brand better find those authentic people? Like, how do they ensure that the people they have sourcing influencers and sourcing those relationships are finding the right people?
You'll see them. It really, most of the brands I see just have someone they found that was really funny on social media already, and they kind of just bring them on their team. So if you see someone who's in your feed who's like repetitively on top of it with trends and jokes, and they have a huge reach, like that's like the perfect people to find. It's a big part of it is just paying attention to what's in front of you.
Thank you. And I want to ask a final question. So does Gen Z want discounts, freebies, and rewards from brands? What reward programs are their go-tos? What do you guys think? Do you want discounts, freebies, rewards from brands?
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't? But I think what really hits the most is like rewards programs. I like there was a week straight where everyone was talking about like how many McDonald's points they have, like on the app. And someone had their McDonald's app like in the dock of their phone. So it's like the first app they see every single time. And I find that so funny.
What about Gerardo and Rose? Do you agree? Do you want these things from brands?
Yeah, always. I think that, Gen Zers, it's like a lot of us are, maybe we're studying or are finished with our studies, and we're in these roles where a lot of times people are being overworked and underpaid. So while we want to, buy from the brands that have like the best environmental impact and all of these things, sometimes those brands are also really expensive, right? So I think like, codes for discounts and things of that nature are always great. Something I remember a brand doing around Earth Day, I forget if it was Blue Land or not, but having the consumers like do something for the discount, like here, send us a picture of the like bag of trash that you picked up from your neighborhood or the beach or whatever, and we'll send you a 10% off thing. Things like that like get the community involved, I think are super great and smart.
Thank you. And one last quick question, this is going to be for you, Gerardo, before we wrap, is Joe says he works in financial services marketing, and he says that Gerardo says they don't trust big mainstream brands. Most younger generations don't think about investing, retirement, good credit, owning a home. How will Gen Z differ as they get older, even though financial stuff might not be on your radar right now?
I would say growing up, well, that's very complicated. But to keep it short, I don't really know anybody my age who actually believes they'll own a house, let alone sees themselves being able to afford that.
Mhm.
On those long terms, I can't even fathom that, because right now I'm living just to survive. So I can't think that far ahead. Yeah, I don't know what else to add there.
Okay,
If
good.
you don't mind, can I add on?
Yes, yes. Quickly,
I
please.
feel like the people I know are constantly thinking about it and how it's just not a possibility. The cost of living goes up higher and higher with each generation, and it gets more impossible to own a house, to the point where it's like I think about me and my future, and I'm like, I have to have roommates, like no matter what. I don't think with the way housing is right now, I can't buy a house in the future. Um, and it's the point where I see like people who are like in their 30s with like decent jobs moving back in with their parents, because it's like it's just hard to live, and it gets harder with each generation. So we're
Thank
thinking about it, but we can't do anything.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It reminds us of some research we recently did on the aspirational gap for Gen Z and some of the values and the things that they really like, and how that can lead to, I think just frustration of, having values you'd like to retain, as Gerardo and we spoke about before, but maybe you don't have the financial capability to, meet all your values or meet all these aspirations. And I know I said we'd wrap, but we have two more good questions that just popped up. So I'd love to give you guys a chance to answer them. And Jessica Navas asks, we're living in a time of such division, anger, and even hopelessness. What does Gen Z do to feel good, joyful, hopeful? What's the balance between a quick hit of happy and feeling something more long-lastingly joyful? And I feel like maybe that's a dopamine question in there as well. So who wants to take this first?
Can I say
Gerardo?
something?
Yes.
Yeah. I will a little treat every single day. I know that people are like, no, save that money so that you can have it later, but we're not guaranteed later at all. So if I want boba today, I'm getting it. And if I want it twice, then I'm getting it. And I don't care if it cuts into like there's literally no guarantee we're just talking about the housing crisis. We've kind of accepted that we're not going to get that. Like I have cousins who are 35 and they got married and live with another cousin with their kid and another like it's just so I'm gonna get my little
Yeah.
treat every single day. I'm gonna, you know, take a walk, go with friends, be delusional. That's my answer.
We're gonna
about-
pay you in boba, Gerardo. That's
Oh
like,
my
I love that
God,
answer.
that means more.
Boba gives you joy. I love that.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say for the rewards. I don't care if you give me free boba, I'll go and I'll buy it. Like that's all you have to do.
And this kind of reminds me of the current trend around being Delulu, right? And like the joy of that and just the freedom in that. And Rose, do you have anything to share on this question before I jump to our next final question?
Yeah, I think especially in the last month where there has been this endless news cycle and endless social media cycle, connection and community has been so big for me. On Monday, I went to this event called Poetry is Gay. It was in Bushwick. It's for creatives, non-creatives, queers, non-queers. And there was just 20 of us in a room chatting, getting to know each other. We wrote a live poem together. We had some time to write, then we shared. And it was amazing. And I think there were a lot of Gen Zers and kind of Zillennials and younger millennials there. So I think connection and community is huge.
Thank you for that. And I just want to share that Joe and Hello Vital in the chat have added that they never thought they'd own a home either. And Hello Vital says, I didn't think I'd be able to own a home until literally this year. And they're 38. So I guess it's multi-generational, this feeling of aspirational gap. And our final question, and I'll give this to you, Rose, first, and then everyone else get a chance to answer, then we'll close out. Where do luxury brands fit into this mix? What are you willing to pay for as Gen Z? I know we just spoke about how there's a lot of financial uncertainty, economic and socio-economic uncertainty, right? Political uncertainty. Where do luxury brands fit into Gen Z's experience and Gen Z's values?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, where luxury brands fit in is like within my environmentalism and within the fact that the majority of like things I buy to wear are secondhand and are thrifted and vintage. So if I want something Gucci, I'm going to the Real. I'm going thrifting. I'm going wherever to see like where I can buy one. I have this like Chanel ring that is a Chanel button. It's a real Chanel button, but it was taken from something. And then this small maker made it into a ring and makes all jewelry like that. And that's something that I think is so exciting. So I think there's like the secondhand market, and that's I think how it fits in for a lot of us. And then also if a brand is doing right by the environment and people, I am willing to spend more on it, right? If I know that they have sustainable practices, it might be something I save up for to buy.
Mm-hmm. Gerardo, did you have something to share?
Yeah, for me personally, I would say unless it's gifted to me, you don't. And like that's kind of, yeah, you just don't.
What about you, T? Where do
Yeah, I
luxury
was gonna
brands
say
fit in it?
they don't fit. So there's things where for me, if I rock with the brand and who it is, I will save up to buy something more like luxury, like Telfar, Black Queer Curator. I'll probably like save up to buy a Telfar bag. But what I've seen more commonly, like more recent generations, is reps and fakes. It's not common. I mean, growing up, it was like, oh, you got fake clothes on, you got fake Jordans. Now it's like I've seen kids being like, where'd you get your fake Jordans? They look identical to the real ones. Like, you paid $30? Yeah, I need that link. That's amazing. Cause like everything's gone up. You know, I remember like when I was younger, I'd go with my dad outside like a Foot Locker to see which new like shoe dropped, and we just buy it. Now it's like they're way more expensive. There's like online buying, and then people like scalp them and like upcharge them for more, and you're like, I can't afford these things. I'm gonna go on the DHgate and buy a fake. It looks just like it for $30.
Yeah. So I want to actually put a pause on that and share something. that Rose said. So Rose, you spoke about the secondhand market, and I think that's really interesting because what we are seeing is a lot of luxury brands kind of getting into the secondhand market now, either selling piece of the inventory that didn't sell to secondhand markets and really trying to funnel some products into secondhand markets. I would assume because they see this trend of sustainability, secondhand fashion, vintage shopping. A lot of brands that are luxury do have vintage histories. And so bringing back vintage styles and silhouettes and all that's really large. And so we are seeing that. And so it really clicked when you said that, seeing those trends. And then another follow-up question Hello Vital has is, what is luxury for you then? How do you define luxury? And before you guys answer that quickly, we did a research study on redefining luxury for Gen Z. And something that we found was luxury for Gen Z is not solely about products and heritage the way it has been previously for generations. It's really more so about experiences, what we found in the research, and control over choice, freedom of time, they saw as a luxury, more so than just product and heritage. But I would love to get your guys' opinion on what does luxury mean to you? How do you define luxury? Like T, you said you would save up for Telfar, and that would be something that would be a luxury purchase for you. So T, if you can start, how do you define luxury?
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know. For me, like big name brands that have already been established, it's kind of like I'm whatever about it. But the more common thing I see is like smaller brands getting popular around a specific group, and that becomes like our luxury. Like to somebody like outside of our culture, it may be like, okay, those are just like an expensive pair of jeans, but to us, it's like, oh no, these are what we want. Like fashion influencers on TikTok and stuff like that. Like the people who follow them are like, oh, I want this like specific patchwork EVSU jeans that are like hard to find. And so we tend to spend more on things that may not have bigger names like Nike or other clothing brands like that, but mean more to us.
Thank you. So there's a rarity aspect to it. There's like a unique and individuation element to how you're defining luxury. How much is a Telfar bag or product or something from there?
Last time I checked, like somewhere between 300 to 400.
Okay.
So Telfar, I think, is a really great example. I love Telfar, and I think Telfar also has this now like social capital because it's like a Black founded brand. It's like, oh, like we see each other. Like if I see someone wearing a Telfar on the streets, I'm like, oh, I got you. But their small bags are they're definitely still luxury, but I think you can get a small Telfar for 100 to 150, and then the larger ones are like 300. So again, totally luxury, but a different kind of luxury than Gucci, Louis Vuitton, etc., which I think really speaks to our generation. In one of Beyonce's Renaissance songs, she's like, my Birkins are in storage, like I'm wearing my Telfar. And I really do think it like speaks to our generation. So I think Telfar is a really good example and a really interesting one considering the social capital they have.
And how do you define luxury, Rose?
I define luxury in a lot of my experiences. Like I am always going to pay more money for concerts than I am for a bag. For example, like saving up for Beyonce's tour. My friends quoted me before she said she was going on tour. I was like, I'll spend 1,000. Like that's it. I'll spend 1,000. And my friends were like, what? Like I'm not a person who buys things that are $200, $500, $800. So for my friends to hear me say that, they were like, whoa, like you good? But it was true. And I did spend a lot of money on her tickets. I'm also a big traveler. So I think that's how I define luxury, and not in staying nice hotels, but in being able to see different countries and like add what countries and states I've been to my little list in my phone that I have going.
Wonderful. And quickly, Gerardo, how do you define luxury?
Yeah, I define it by do I want it or do I need it? So for example, we were just talking about Olivardo. That is a luxury. I didn't need to get clothes that was queer and made in Mexico. And you know what I mean? Like I wanted it, so I saved up for it so that I could buy it. Or my hair, I don't need to buy from Pattern. Pattern is this really good hair brand for like a wide range of curly hair. I don't need to get that one, but I love the way their leave-in conditioner makes my hair feel and how it takes care of it. So I save up to buy it because I could just go with a more accessible brand, like you know what I mean, like leave-in conditioner. But I don't want that. I want Patterns because it's really good, and yeah. So always defined by that.
Thank you. Thank you guys for sharing. So we're going to wrap. A massive thank you to you lovely, brilliant panelists for joining us today. And thank you to all of our attendees. Thank you for the really lively Q&A. That was really incredible to watch that back and forth. And thank you for sharing, you know, all of your guys' experiences and connecting in that way. That was a really great example of excellent communication, as we spoke in Dimension 5. And a surprise that we have for all attendees is we asked all panelists to share 3 recommendations for brands seeking to genuinely connect with Gen Z and 3 common pitfalls that brands should avoid when targeting Gen Z. And we're going to share that out as a thank you for attendance. And because some of that luxury question came up and we have some existing redefining luxury study information, I'll also share that in the follow-up for the attendees so you can see some of that data as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. I
Till the
appreciate
next
it.
one, the next webinar is next month on the restaurant world. So be sure to register and tune in. You can find the registration live on the vital.world website. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.